My name is Sudhir and you're watching Study with Sudhir, your favorite digital classroom. We are looking at the Chinese statue, which is part of the ISC English Literature syllabus, both for class 11 and 12. And this is written by Jeffrey Archer, one of my favorite authors, which is why I have got some of the novels that I have as part of this collection. Anyone who aspires to read interesting, thrilling fiction must read Jeffrey Archer's work. Not just because he's a very engaging kind of writer, but even as a storyteller, he will keep you completely riveted. All his novels, without exception, are page turners. So, if you are interested in reading quality English literature, you should read Jeffrey Archer. Many of his books are about great political happenings and set in America, set in UK. And I must have read lots of his books. In fact, I could just carry 4 of his novels out for this recording. I've got many more in my bookshelf. So this is something, and in fact, I read them over and over again because you tend to forget, and so intricate are his plots. I wouldn't say the same about the Chinese statue, but definitely his novels are something which I would strongly recommend you read. So what I'll do is, since I like recommending books and at least some of you students here like to kind of read books, so I would put my favorite Jeffrey Archer novels. I'll put up the list in the description box. Please go and have a look, and as I said, I would strongly recommend R.K. Narayan and Jeffrey Archer. I say it openly, my favorite 2 authors, and of course Ruskin Bond also pretty much part of that list. Okay, now let's get started with the Chinese statue. We'll be doing it in 3 parts because just like a horse and 2 goats in your ICSE class 9 and 10, this is also a very long story. So we need to kind of go through each and every part very carefully. It's not a complicated story except for the fact that it follows a very non-linear approach. It's not like, telling a story from start to finish. It starts, then it goes into flashback and then comes again, and that's where the twist is. So we'll be doing it in 3 parts in order to be able to do justice to the story and also to ensure that you understand what the Chinese statue is all about. Okay. Now, Jeffrey Archer also is very knowledgeable about cricket, and that's another topic which he loves talking about, right? Okay. The little Chinese statue was the next item to come under the auctioneer's hammer. Now, auction is something which now that with IPL you would be a little more familiar with. Now, auctions essentially happen of course of property plots, real estate, and of course if anyone defaults on loans, his or her property is sold, is auctioned. This is referring to artifacts, antique kind of items, right? So what essentially happens is that people, वो बोलते हैं ना, बोली लगाते हैं नीलामी के दौरान. So that's what happens, that everyone bids with a particular price, and whoever bids the highest gets that particular antique item. So auctioneer's hammer. Hammer is because when the deal is done finally, there is a small kind of a hammer which the auctioneer, the lead auctioneer, has in his hand. So he will say, say for instance, just to take an example, 5 lakh rupees 1, 5 lakh rupees 2, 5 lakh rupees 3, and the antique goes to this gentleman. That's the way it's done. Lot 103, and that's what this particular Chinese statue's numbering was. Lot 103 caused those quiet murmurings that always precede the sale of a masterpiece. So people who are knowledgeable about these antique items know when a masterpiece is being auctioned. Okay, so there is that buzz going around the auction hall. The auctioneer's assistant held up the delicate piece of ivory for the packed audience to admire. Packed audience means the hall was absolutely full to admire, while the auctioneer glanced around the room to be sure he knew where the serious bidders were seated. Why the reference to the serious bidders? I mean, why are we saying that everyone out there in the hall is not a serious bidder? Because there are a whole lot of times when there are people who are generally part of the audience to jack up the price, right? To let the price go up a little. So they will just say, if someone says 2 lakh, they'll say 2.5 lakh, and then this person will kind of be inspired to say 3 lakh. So they'll just jack up the price in the bargain, the non-serious bidders. So that's why it's the reference to the serious bidders, but the non-serious bidders' wallets may not really be very loaded. I studied my catalogue and read the detailed description of the piece and what was known of its history. The statue had been purchased in Harluchon in I hope I'm pronouncing the Chinese names right? Okay, I may be a little bit here and there. In 1871, and was referred to as what Sotheby's quaintly described as a property of a gentleman. Now, auctioneering, of course, is a craft, right? It comes with both knowledge as well as with experience, and the person who had owned it had actually bought it, purchased it, or at least acquired it in the year 1871. Now, quaintly is essentially in an attractively old-fashioned manner, right? Quaint, you generally refer to, a railway station which is like, the old time. You refer, oh, it was a very quaint looking railway station, those small town, small railway stations with a touch of, it looks very romantic, and with the small two benches put there, platform neat, and those kind of things. So that's what is referred to as, slightly old fashioned in a very nice manner. That some member of the aristocracy did not wish to admit that he was having to sell off one of the family heirlooms. Now, heirlooms essentially means which is part of the family wealth, what has been passed on from generation to generation. I wondered if that was the case on this occasion and decided to do some research to discover what had caused the little Chinese statue to find its way into the auction rooms on that Thursday morning over 100 years later. Heirloom, another way of talking about it is that, many brides, when they're getting married, they say that, okay, this is my jewelry from my mother's family heirloom. So it's something which has been passed on to her mother, from her mother, from her mother. That's how the word heirloom comes essentially and is used. So this one is up there for auction on that Thursday morning, more than 100 years after it was purchased by many generations before. Lot number 103 declared the auctioneer, what am I bid for this magnificent example of, and he doesn't complete the sentence. Sir Alexander Heathcote, as well as being a gentleman, was an exact man. He was exactly 6'3" and a quarter inches tall, rose at 7 o'clock every morning, joined his wife for breakfast to eat one boiled egg, cooked for precisely 4 minutes, 2 pieces of toast with 1 spoonful of Cooper's marmalade, and drink 1 cup of China tea. He would then take a hackney carriage from his home in Cadogan Gardens at exactly 8:20 and arrive at the Foreign Office at promptly 8:59, returning home again on the stroke of 6 o'clock. Obviously, he didn't have any traffic jams driving from home to office and back. He's so precise that 8:20, 8:59, he would be there in office. Fantastic. Now, it also shows the kind of person he is. Very, very precise, very, very perfect, doing things at a precise moment through the day. Works at the Foreign Office, so shows that he comes from a very accomplished kind of a background. Hackney carriage is the official term that is used for a taxi. Okay, it's not a carriage, it's not a ghoda gadi, it's a taxi, right? Sir Alexander had been exact from an early age, as became the only son of a general. So his father was in the army, but unlike his father, he chose to serve his queen in the diplomatic service. Just like in the civil services, when you write and clear the UPSC, you have the IPS to join the police, the IAS to join the administrative service, the bureaucracy, the IFS to join the foreign service and serve in diplomatic missions abroad for India, representing your country. So similarly, Sir Alexander Heathcote is doing it for the Queen, because just like the President of India, you have the Queen of England. So he is serving in her diplomatic corps, CORPS, the way it is pronounced, the diplomatic service out here. Another exacting calling, and that's as tough as is the IAS or the IPS. I'm talking about the Indian equivalent. He progressed from a shared desk at the Foreign Office in Whitehall to third secretary in Calcutta. This is his career path. To second secretary in Vienna, to first secretary in Rome, to deputy ambassador in Washington, and finally to minister in Peking. Peking, which is now Beijing. Okay, that's how it is spelt and pronounced now. So it's obviously, he's a very self-disciplined man, probably because of his father who was serving in the army, and exacting, as I said, it's also a very demanding kind of a profession, and this is the career path, having served in different diplomatic missions for the UK abroad. He was delighted when Mr. Gladstone invited him to represent the government in China, as he had for some considerable time taken more than an amateur interest in the art of the Ming dynasty. This crowning appointment in his distinguished career would afford him what until then he would have considered impossible, an opportunity to observe in their natural habitat some of the great statues, paintings and drawings which he had previously been able to admire only in books. So he is someone who has an interest in Chinese culture and art, and therefore he looks at this opportunity to serve as the ambassador of the UK in China, in Beijing, as a chance to actually see them up close instead of having only seen their photographs in books. So it's also coincidental that he had taken an interest in the Ming dynasty. The Ming dynasty was the ruling dynasty of China from 1368 to 1644, and you would do well to remember this basic idea because the Ming dynasty is something which is important through the entire story. It was the last imperial dynasty of China which was ruled by Han Chinese. Okay, this is something which I have picked up from Google. Okay, now Ming dynasty, if you want to know some more details, it was known for its trade expansion to the outside world that established cultural ties with the West, and it's also remembered, and this part is important, it's also remembered for its interests and works in the field of drama, that is theatre, literature and world-renowned porcelain. Okay. Now, when Sir Alexander arrived in Peking after a journey by sea and land that took his party nearly 2 months, so you can imagine the amount of time that it would have taken to travel from London to Beijing. He presented his seals patent to the Empress Susi and a personal letter for her private reading from Queen Victoria. Now, presented his seals. Essentially what happens is that if you are a diplomat, an ambassador who is being posted in a different country, let's take for example the Indian ambassador to the US or to the UK, let's take it as an example. So what you do is that you, the ambassador, the newly appointed ambassador, would go to Queen Elizabeth at the Buckingham Palace and present his or her credentials. That's what it's called. Here it is being referred to as seals patent. Okay, different word, basically means that you will be presenting your appointment letter that so and so has been appointed as the ambassador to the UK representing the country Republic of India, and you would be presenting it formally. It's a formal ceremony where you present it to the head of state, right? So similarly he does that to the Empress in Beijing on behalf of Queen Victoria. The Empress, dressed from head to toe in white and gold, received her new ambassador in the throne room of the Imperial Palace. She read the letter from the British monarch, that is Queen Victoria, while Sir Alexander remained standing to attention. Her Imperial Highness revealed nothing of its contents to the new minister, only wishing him a successful term of office in his appointment. She then moved her lips slightly up at the corners, which Sir Alexander judged correctly to mean that the audience had come to an end. So you see a very, very royal and a very, very formal kind of an atmosphere. As he was conducted back through the great halls of the Imperial Palace by a Mandarin. Now, Mandarin is how the Chinese are referred to. The Chinese language, just like the Indian language is referred to as, of course, we have many languages, regional languages like Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Bengali, Marathi. Mandarin is the language spoken in China. By Mandarin, in the long coat dress of black and gold, Sir Alexander walked as slowly as possible, taking in the magnificent collection of ivory and jade statues which was scattered casually around the building, much in the way Cellini and Michelangelo today lie stacked against each other in Florence. So you can imagine the stature of the creators, the sculptors of all those statues, that he's actually comparing them with Cellini and Michelangelo, right? So he's putting them up on that pedestal the way it was in Europe. Similarly, the people who had actually sculpted them in China. As his ministerial appointment was only for 3 years, Sir Alexander took no leave but preferred to use his time to put the embassy behind him and travel on horseback into the outlying districts to learn more about the country and its people. Important, it shows a certain aspect of Sir Alexander that he wants to discover the country personally on horseback. So he traveled a lot, took absolutely no leave. On these trips, he was always accompanied by a Mandarin from the palace staff who acted as interpreter and guide to basically help him converse with the locals, who obviously will speak in Mandarin, to be able to do from English to Mandarin and from Mandarin to English. So one such person will always accompany him. Now, Once a journey passing through the muddy streets of a small village with but a few houses called Haluchon, a distance of some 15 miles from Peking, Sir Alexander chanced upon an old craftsman's working place. Leaving his servants, the minister dismounted from his horse and entered the ramshackle wooden workshop to admire the delicate pieces of ivory and jade that crammed the shelves from floor to ceiling. Although modern, the pieces were superbly executed by an experienced craftsman, and the minister entered the little hut with the thought of acquiring a small memento of his journey. Once in the shop, he could hardly move in any direction for fear of knocking something over. The building had not been designed for a 6'3" visitor. So you can imagine that a very small, tiny kind of a place where obviously a person of his height is extraordinarily tall, could not really fit in. So he is there and he sees a number of statues made of ivory and jade out there cramming the shelves. So the cramming is what? Basically being put very close to each other. Sir Alexander stood still and enthralled. Enthralled essentially means very impressed, taken in by the sight, because he understands the significance of these statues. Unlike someone else who may not understand it, right? Many of us understand the significance of a valuable painting, right? If you are an art student or understand the beauty of art, for many of us, it's just like another painting, and we may not understand the nuances of the color scheme or the messaging that the artist is trying to do. Here, Sir Alexander understands the value of a piece of art. Sir Alexander stood still and enthralled, taking in the fine scented jasmine smell that hung in the air, right? So he's giving you a very visual kind of an imagery, and what was even the smell that hung in the air. An old craftsman bustled forward in a long blue coolie robe and flat black hat to greet him. So you're giving him a sense of what he was wearing, right? A jet black plaited pigtail fell down on his back. So long hair in a pigtail and also a coolie robe, essentially very working kind of a clothes. He bowed very low and then looked up at the giant from England. So referring to him as a giant because this man is short, while Sir Alexander is obviously very tall in comparison to him. Sir Alexander returned the bow. Bow as in people, as in they do in Japan in particular, and to an extent even in China, the Far East countries. While the Mandarin explained who Sir Alexander was and his desire to be allowed to look at the work of the craftsman. So the person is kind of translating what Sir Alexander says and what he has really come there for. The old man was nodding his agreement even before the Mandarin had come to the end of his request. For over an hour, the minister sighed and chuckled as he studied many of the pieces with admiration and finally returned to the old man to praise his skill. The craftsman bowed once again and a shy smile revealed no teeth but only genuine pleasure at Sir Alexander's compliment. So obviously praising him a lot. Pointing a finger to the back of the shop, he beckoned the two important visitors to follow him. They did so and entered a veritable Aladdin's cave with row upon row of beautiful miniature emperors and classical figures. Now veritable essentially is used for emphasis. It doesn't mean much in its own way, but veritable Aladdin's cave. Now Aladdin's cave is what? Again something which has a sense of mystery. So there he has got something more, which is why veritable, and when he used the word veritable, it kind of emphasizes on Aladdin's cave. And there he had many miniature emperors and classical figures, much more than what was there in the room before. The minister could have happily settled down in the orgy of ivory for at least a week. Orgy essentially means something in excess, right? Something more in excess than what it ideally should be, and that's what the word orgy means. People do some things in excess, and it could be both in a positive and a negative sense. Of course, here it's in a positive sense, but it could also mean in a negative sense, and that's what the use of the word orgy means. Sir Alexander and the craftsman chatted away to each other through the interpreter, and the minister's love and knowledge of the Ming dynasty was soon revealed. The little craftsman's face lit up with this discovery, and he turned to the Mandarin and in a hushed tone made a request. The Mandarin nodded his agreement and translated. I have, Your Excellency. So they're talking, and obviously he's waiting to be told what the craftsman is saying in Mandarin. I have, Your Excellency, a piece of Ming myself that you might care to see. A statue that has been in my family for over 7 generations. Now this is important. This is the operative part of the story. because he says that he has a particular piece of the Ming dynasty for the last 7 generations and he wants it to be seen by Sir Alexander because he is so knowledgeable about the Ming dynasty, right? I should be honored, said the minister. It is I who should be honored, your excellency, said the little man, who thereupon scampered out of the back door, nearly falling over a stray dog and onto an old peasant house a few yards behind the workshop. Now, nearly falling over a stray dog essentially means that the hurry with which he is trying to get that piece of work which he wants to show. Please note that it is the craftsman who is offering to show it to Sir Alexander. Okay, an important point that you would do well to remember because it will be connected to what finally happens in the explanation video number 3. The minister and the mandarin remained in the back room, for Sir Alexander knew the old man would never have considered inviting an honored guest into his humble home until they had known each other for many years. Now, this is part of the Chinese, the Mandarin culture, and only then after he had been invited to Sir Alexander's home first. So, only when 2 things happen, this would have he would have ever considered inviting him home. He would do that only if they had known each other for several years, and only after Sir Alexander had invited him first to his home. Only then the Mandarin would have invited, the Mandarin as in the craftsman would have invited Sir Alexander into his home. In the front portion was obviously the work area where he worked. A few minutes passed before the little blue figure came trotting back, pigtail bouncing up and down on his shoulders. He was now clinging on to something that, from the very way he held it close to his chest, had to be a treasure. The craftsman passed the piece over for the minister to study. So, he was holding it like this close to his chest, obviously conveying that it is a valuable piece of work. Sir Alexander's mouth opened wide and he could not hide his excitement. The little statue, no more than 6 inches in height, was of Emperor Kung, and as fine an example of Ming as the minister had seen. Emperor Kung of the Ming dynasty. Sir Alexander felt confident that the maker was the great Pen Qiu, one of the famous sculptors during the Ming dynasty, who had been patronized by the emperor, so that the date must have been around the turn of the 15th century. Okay, so you're now getting a sense of the time during which the sculpture would have been made. The statue's only blemish was that the ivory base on which such pieces usually rest was missing. Okay, they generally have a base on which something like this is put, and a small stick protruded from the bottom of the imperial robes, but in the eyes of Sir Alexander nothing could detract from its overall beauty. Although the craftsman's lips did not move, his eyes glowed with the pleasure his guest evinced as in showed, as he studied the ivory emperor. Okay, so basically Sir Alexander completely impressed, completely bowled over by the craftsmanship of this particular piece of work of Emperor Kung, right? He's very impressed. He's enthralled by the look of it, and even the craftsman could see that the diplomat, the ambassador to China, was very impressed. What we will do is, we will pause here. Okay, in part 2 we will go through the rest of the story, and in part 3 we will conclude the story and talk about the major themes of this particular story. I hope you are finding it interesting, you are not finding it complicated, and you will be able to do it well if a question comes from the Chinese statue in your examination. Thank you very much for watching.